One lie was enough to destroy everything. Trust didn't just crack at Maxton Hall, it shattered. And now, Season 3 opens in a world where silence is dangerous, truth is expensive, and love might not survive what comes next. Maxton Hall Season 3 begins in the emotional wreckage left behind by the scandal that changed everything. There is no reset, no fresh start. The damage is visible in every corner of Ruby's life. Her suspension hangs over her like a shadow. Her reputation has been quietly rewritten by people who never bothered to ask for the truth, and the future she fought so hard to build now feels painfully out of reach. This isn't the ambitious, hopeful Ruby from earlier seasons. This version is tired, wounded, and carrying the weight of betrayal on her shoulders. Yet beneath that exhaustion, something else is growing. A sharp, unbreakable resolve. At Maxton Hall, Ruby becomes a subject of whispers instead of respect. Every look feels like judgment. Every silence feels intentional. The system moves on as if she is already guilty, as if her voice no longer matters. And that realization cuts deeper than the scandal itself. Ruby isn't just fighting rumors anymore. She's fighting a powerful structure that protects its image at any cost, even if it means destroying someone who doesn't belong to its world of privilege and influence. James, meanwhile, exists in a different kind of ruin. The distance between him and Ruby is no longer about misunderstandings. It's about broken trust. Even when they share the same space, something vital is missing. Guilt weighs heavily on him, not just because of what happened, but because of what he failed to stop. The pressure from his father tightens, closing in quietly but relentlessly. Mortimer remains calm, controlled, and terrifyingly confident. He moves behind the scenes, shaping outcomes, silencing problems, and convincing himself that no one can challenge him. What makes this moment so intense is the loneliness on both sides. Ruby and James are surrounded by people, yet completely alone. They want to reach for each other, but hesitation holds them back. Fear of causing more pain becomes stronger than the need for comfort. And in that silence, Maxton Hall transforms. The school no longer feels like a place of learning. It feels like a battlefield where power decides who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. Season 3 doesn't ease into its story. It confronts the audience with a painful truth right away. Sometimes the hardest fight isn't proving you're innocent. It's surviving in a world that has already decided you're not. As Season 3 pushes forward, the true nature of control at Maxton Hall begins to surface. What once felt like strict authority now reveals itself as something far more calculated. Decisions are made quietly, behind closed doors, and always in favor of those with influence. Ruby quickly realizes that fairness was never part of the system. It was only an illusion. Every appeal she makes is delayed. Every explanation she offers is questioned. The silence from those in charge becomes louder than any accusation, and with each passing day, the message becomes clearer. Staying quiet is expected, not justice. This pressure forces Ruby to confront a terrifying truth. Playing by the rules will never protect her, because those rules were designed to protect people like Mortimer, not people like her. Instead of shrinking under that realization, Ruby begins to change. The fear that once kept her cautious starts turning into clarity. She questions decisions, she demands answers, and while her voice may shake, it no longer disappears. This shift makes her dangerous, not because she is loud, but because she refuses to disappear. James's struggle deepens in a different way. The conflict between him and his father stops being emotional and becomes ideological. Mortimer doesn't see James as a son, he sees him as property, a legacy to control, shape, and silence when necessary. Subtle manipulation replaces open arguments. Guilt is weaponized. Expectations tighten like a trap. And James begins to understand that obedience won't save anyone, not Ruby, and not himself. The more he questions his father, the more pressure he feels closing in from all sides. What makes this tension unbearable is how isolated James becomes. Even those who care about him start to doubt him. The idea that he could be responsible for the scandal lingers unspoken, poisoning trust and pulling him further into silence. Mortimer uses this uncertainty perfectly, presenting himself as calm and reasonable while quietly tightening his grip. He doesn't need threats. His power speaks for him. Meanwhile, cracks begin to form around the official story. Small doubts appear, unanswered questions refuse to disappear. Supporting characters start to notice inconsistencies, moments that don't add up, reactions that feel rehearsed. These quiet observations don't explode into action yet. They simmer, and that simmering tension is what makes Season 3 so heavy. Truth feels close, but reaching for it comes with risk. This section of the story makes one thing painfully clear. At Maxton Hall, power doesn't just silence people, it isolates them. And the closer Ruby and James move toward resistance, the more dangerous the consequences become. By the time Season 3 reaches its emotional middle, the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Silence, once a form of survival, starts to feel like another kind of punishment. Ruby carries the weight of being treated as a problem instead of a person. Teachers avoid her gaze. Classmates either stare too long or look away completely. Every day at Maxton Hall reminds her that the system has already chosen a version of the truth that doesn't include her. Yet instead of breaking, something steadier begins to form inside her. A quiet strength built from exhaustion, anger, and the understanding that no one is coming to rescue her. This is where Ruby reaches a breaking point. She stops waiting for permission to speak. She challenges decisions that make no sense. She refuses to accept half-truths designed to make problems disappear rather than solve them. Her resistance isn't loud or reckless, it's deliberate. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because once someone like Ruby stops playing along, the entire illusion of control starts to weaken. James, at the same time, finds himself trapped between guilt and awakening. The doubt surrounding him grows heavier, not just from others, but within himself. He begins to question everything he was taught to value. Loyalty, success, family, power. Mortimer's influence no longer feels protective. It feels suffocating. The more James resists, the more clearly he sees how carefully his father manipulates every situation. Love becomes conditional. Approval becomes a weapon. And the realization that his father's world destroys anything that doesn't obey hits harder than any argument they've ever had. Around them, the truth begins to leak through the cracks. Lydia's guilt becomes impossible to hide. Her silence starts to cost her sleep, her relationships, and her sense of self. Every moment she hesitates feels like another betrayal, and the pressure to finally speak grows unbearable. Others begin asking quiet questions, noticing inconsistencies, sensing that someone is desperate to keep certain facts buried. These doubts don't explode all at once. They spread slowly, dangerously. What makes this part of Season 3 so intense is the uncertainty. No one knows who to trust. Alliances feel fragile. Every step toward the truth carries the risk of everything collapsing. The school feels tense, heavy with unspoken accusations and unfinished conversations. And beneath it all lies a terrifying realization. This scandal was never just an accident. Someone benefited from the chaos. Someone planned for silence. As the cracks widen, one thing becomes clear. Once silence starts to break, there's no way to control what comes out next. As Season 3 moves deeper, the story shifts from fear to consequence. Every choice made in silence begins to demand a price. The emotional toll of the scandal spreads far beyond Ruby and James, touching everyone caught in its shadow. Ruby is no longer just fighting for her name. She's fighting exhaustion. The pressure to prove her innocence becomes overwhelming, and the constant resistance from authorities starts to wear her down. Yet, instead of collapsing, she adapts. Her pain sharpens her focus. She learns when to speak, when to wait, and when to refuse outright. This version of Ruby is no longer asking to be treated fairly. She's insisting on it. James reaches a turning point of his own. Living under Mortimer's control has cost him too much. His relationship with Ruby, his sense of identity, and his ability to trust himself have all been damaged. The fear that once kept him obedient begins to lose its grip. There's a noticeable shift in him. Quieter, colder, and more resolved. He stops trying to earn his father's approval and starts questioning whether staying in Mortimer's world is worth the price. And for the first time, the idea of walking away feels less terrifying than staying. Mortimer senses this change immediately. His calm confidence sharpens into something more dangerous. He tightens his control, applying pressure where it hurts most. Subtle threats replace guidance. Emotional manipulation replaces concern. His power is no longer about protection, it's about ownership. And the more James pulls away, the more ruthless Mortimer becomes. The illusion of being untouchable starts to crack, but men like Mortimer don't fall quietly. The supporting characters are no longer on the sidelines. Lydia's internal battle reaches its breaking point. Her guilt becomes heavier than her fear, and the weight of knowing the truth begins to crush her. Every second of silence feels like another life damaged. Others, too, feel the consequences of earlier choices. Trust erodes. Relationships strain. The damage caused by adult decisions becomes impossible to ignore. What drives the tension in this section is the growing awareness that the truth is close, but dangerous. Every step toward it feels like walking on thin ice. One wrong move could destroy everything. Season 3 doesn't offer comfort here. It forces its characters to face a brutal reality. Once you choose to stand up against power, there is no safe way back. As Maxton Hall Season 3 reaches its most critical moments, everything begins to collide. The lies that were protected by fear and influence can no longer stay buried. The pressure of holding them together starts to break people down. Secrets surface not because it's safe, but because staying silent becomes impossible. The truth doesn't arrive gently. It comes with consequences, anger, and loss. But it also brings clarity. For the first time, the narrative that destroyed Ruby begins to unravel. Ruby stands at the center of this storm, exhausted but unshaken. She has already lost so much that fear no longer controls her. What scares her now is giving up on herself. She refuses to let powerful people decide the shape of her future. When the truth finally starts to come out, it doesn't erase the pain or restore everything that was taken, but it changes something just as important. It shifts the balance of power. Silence no longer protects those who abused it. James's journey reaches a moment where choice becomes unavoidable. He finally understands that love doesn't mean obedience, and protection doesn't mean control. Staying in his father's world would cost him everything that matters. Walking away means losing comfort, status, and certainty. But it also means becoming his own person. This decision doesn't magically repair what was broken between him and Ruby, but it creates space for honesty. And after everything they've endured, honesty becomes the most meaningful beginning of all. The supporting characters face their own reckoning. Confessions are made, loyalties are tested, long-standing lies begin to collapse under the weight of truth. No one walks away untouched, and Season 3 never pretends otherwise. Healing is slow. Forgiveness is complicated, but growth becomes possible. What makes the ending of Season 3 powerful is its quiet hope. Not the promise that everything will be perfect, but the belief that fighting for yourself matters. Ruby chooses her future. James chooses his freedom. And Maxton Hall is forced to confront the damage caused by protecting power instead of people. This was never just a story about scandal or romance. It was about courage, truth, and the strength it takes to choose yourself when the world tries to define you. And Season 3 proves that sometimes new beginnings don't come from happy endings. They come from surviving the darkness and refusing to stay silent. The storm that had been quietly gathering over Maxton Hall finally crashes. Secrets that were carefully buried, whispers that were cautiously suppressed, and lies that had been protected by fear and authority all collide in a way that leaves no one untouched. Ruby stands at the epicenter, her exhaustion visible, but her resolve unshaken. She has already endured humiliation, betrayal, and isolation. She has been treated as a liability, a problem to be managed, and yet through it all, she has transformed. What was once fear is now clarity. What was once heartbreak is now determination. Every glance from those around her, every whisper, every sidelong stare only fuels the fire within her. The realization that her life, her future, and her voice belong to no one else but herself. James, equally burdened but in a different way, faces the final weight of the consequences that have been building against him. His father's manipulations, the doubt sown by Mortimer's subtle threats, and the relentless scrutiny from everyone at Maxton Hall have cornered him emotionally and morally. Yet, in this pressure, a new understanding emerges. The obedience that once defined him is replaced by choice. For the first time, he sees that protecting Ruby, protecting himself, and standing up to his father are not mutually exclusive. They are intertwined, and the decision he must make, to stay under his father's control or step into an uncertain freedom, will shape not only his life, but the future of everyone around him. Meanwhile, Mortimer's calm, calculated power begins to fracture under the growing awareness that his control is not absolute. The subtle cracks in his empire, previously invisible, now start to widen. Every carefully crafted manipulation faces resistance. Allies he thought loyal begin questioning his motives. The authority he wielded effortlessly for so long now faces scrutiny, and the fear he instilled in others cannot suppress the instinct for truth forever. Mortimer's confidence, previously untouchable, shows signs of strain as the consequences of his actions ripple outward. Those around him, once trapped in silence, start making choices of their own. And with each act of defiance, the unspoken rules of Maxton Hall shift imperceptibly, setting the stage for a confrontation that is inevitable. The supporting characters, who had existed on the periphery, now step fully into the light. Lydia's guilt, long simmering beneath a fragile veneer of composure, can no longer be contained. Every hesitation, every silent second becomes unbearable. She begins to act, reluctantly at first, then with growing urgency. Each confession she makes, each truth she reveals, creates shock waves through the already tense corridors of Maxton Hall. Ember, Alice Dester, and Wren, who had begun quietly questioning the official story, now take deliberate steps to uncover hidden facts, piecing together a puzzle that has been deliberately fragmented. Their courage, small at first, becomes monumental as it intersects with Ruby's defiance and James's newfound resolve. Together they form a network of truth seekers, challenging not only the lies, but the systems that allowed them to persist. As the revelations accumulate, Maxton Hall itself seems to shift in tone and atmosphere. The school that once felt like a battlefield now becomes a crucible, testing the limits of endurance, loyalty, and moral courage. Meetings behind closed doors, decisions made without transparency, and the habitual protection of reputation over justice begin to unravel. Every character feels the weight of the institution's failures, not as abstract consequences, but as immediate, personal challenges that demand attention and action. The air is thick with tension. Every glance carries suspicion. Every interaction is layered with the fear of betrayal or exposure. And yet, amidst this chaos, there is a growing sense of possibility. That honesty, though painful, can lead to liberation. Ruby, at the center of this whirlwind, reaches the point where her actions are no longer reactive, but proactive. Her defiance is deliberate, carefully measured, and strategically executed. She speaks to those in positions of power, challenges decisions that have harmed her, and refuses to accept excuses that are thinly veiled justifications for injustice. Her courage, born from suffering, inspires others. What was once a world where silence was survival now becomes a space where speaking out becomes a weapon. And in every encounter, whether with teachers, classmates, or authority figures, Ruby demonstrates a level of self-possession and moral clarity that is both intimidating and transformative. James, paralleling Ruby's arc, confronts the moral and emotional cost of remaining in his father's orbit. Mortimer's manipulations, which once held him in a silent grip, are now met with quiet resistance. James begins to act decisively, not recklessly, understanding that his choices carry consequences beyond himself. Every small act of defiance, every truth he decides to voice, chips away at the foundation of control that Mortimer has maintained for years. In these moments, the emotional wall between him and Ruby begins to thin. Though their trust cannot be instantly repaired, the shared understanding of struggle and resistance begins to create the space for honesty, respect, and renewed connection.